The turkey was already cold by the time I paid the check. I remember sitting there at a window table in a Denny's off Route 9, watching cars pull in and out of the parking lot. Families, mostly. A woman lifting a toddler out of a car seat. Two teenagers arguing over who got to carry the pie, an older couple moving slowly toward the entrance, the man holding the door open, even though she hadn't reached it yet, just standing there, patient, like he'd been doing it for 40 years and would do it 40 more. I had ordered the turkey dinner because it was Thanksgiving and that's what you do. But when it came, I just looked at it. The gravy had already started to film over. The cranberry sauce was the kind from a can, still holding the ridge shape of the can. I didn't care. I wasn't there for the food. My son had called me 4 days before, not to invite me. To make sure I understood, I wasn't invited. Dad, he said, and even the way he said that word had changed over the years. It used to be warm. When he was little and would run toward me when I got home from work, that word sounded like something good. Now, it sounded like the beginning of a speech he'd rehearsed. Dad, Vanessa, and I talked, and this year we're doing the holiday just the two of us, and her family. It's nothing personal, she just needs her space. Her space. In my son's house, on Thanksgiving. I didn't say anything right away. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at the magnetic notepad on the fridge, where I still had his childhood drawing of a football player, held up by a corner magnet. He'd given it to me when he was 7. I'd moved it from house to house for 30 years. I understand, I said finally. It's just this year, he said. We'll figure something out for Christmas. He didn't call it Christmas either. His name is Trent. He's 41 years old. He works in commercial real estate in Charlotte, and he drives a truck that costs more than I made in my best year. His wife Vanessa is smart and ambitious and about as warm as a January morning in Minnesota. I don't say that out of bitterness. I say it because it's accurate. The first time I met her, she spent 20 minutes explaining why she didn't like the neighborhood I lived in, and she said it with a smile, like she was doing me a favor. I don't blame her for everything. I want to say that clearly. What happened with me and Trent didn't start with Vanessa. It started earlier, in the small, quiet ways that fathers and sons drift apart when neither of them does the work to stay close. I worked a lot when he was growing up. Too much. His mother and I divorced when he was 16, and I handled it badly, and he was old enough to know it, but too young to forgive it easily. By the time he was in his mid-30s, we were polite strangers who called each other on birthdays and split the bill at lunch twice a year. Vanessa just finished what was already most of the way done. But sitting in that Denny's on Thanksgiving afternoon, I wasn't thinking about root causes. I was thinking about how quiet my apartment was going to be when I got back. I was thinking about the fact that I was 63 years old, and the only person on earth who knew where I was right now was the waitress who'd brought me my filmed-over gravy. That's when I heard the noise. Not loud, just full. The particular fullness of a table where people are happy to be together. It was coming from the big round booth in the back corner, the one I'd noticed when I came in, but deliberately sat as far from as possible because I hadn't wanted to be near families. But now I looked. There were 6 of them. An older woman who seemed to be the center of gravity for the whole table. The kind of woman whose laugh makes everyone else laugh a beat after. 2 men who were probably her sons, both of them thick and broad-shouldered, both of them cutting turkey for the kids beside them. A younger woman, a daughter or daughter-in-law, who was trying to keep a toddler from putting cranberry sauce in her hair. And across from her, a girl of maybe 9 who was reading a book with the determined focus of a child who has learned she can be at a family dinner and technically still be alone. I recognized something in that girl. The way she held the book slightly angled, not fully hiding behind it, present but retreated. The older woman glanced up and caught me looking. I turned away, embarrassed. But a moment later, I heard the booth creak, and then her voice. "Honey, are you here by yourself?" She was standing beside my table. 60s, maybe early 70s, white hair that she wore loose around her face. She had the posture of someone who had worked physical jobs for most of her life and was proud of it. "I am," I said. On Thanksgiving? I didn't know what to say to that. It was Thanksgiving. Yes, she pulled out the chair across from me without asking and sat down. My name is Fern, she said. My boys over there are going to be arguing about football in about 10 minutes, and I already sat through that argument last year and the year before. Would you like some company? I looked at her. She was completely serious. I'm Hal, I said. She called over her shoulder, Sissel, bring the man a piece of pie. That was 3 years ago. I should tell you about what happened between that Thanksgiving and now, because the story didn't go in a straight line. That's the part that surprised me. I expected, if anything changed, that it would change gradually. A slow warming. But that's not what happened. What happened was Trent. He called me in February, about 2 months after that Thanksgiving. Not on my birthday, not for any occasion. Just called. I was surprised to see his name on my phone. I answered and waited. Hey, Dad. The voice was different, not rehearsed. Tired. Hey. So, things are a little tight right now. Long pause. Vanessa and I had some unexpected expenses. The roof on the house. And there's some credit card stuff. I waited. I was wondering if you might be able to help us out. Just a loan. We'd pay it back. I want to be honest about how I felt in that moment. Because it was complicated. There was the immediate instinct to say yes. The father instinct. The thing that doesn't go away no matter how old they are or how many Thanksgivings they don't invite you to. There was also something else. A tiredness. The same tiredness I'd felt looking at that cold turkey dinner. That feeling of being a convenience, a resource, a number to call when you need something. I had some money. Not a lot. I'd worked 37 years in telecommunications, retired at 60, and I had a modest amount saved, enough to be comfortable, not enough to be reckless with. How much are you talking about? I asked. He told me. It was $15,000. I was quiet long enough that he said, Dad? I need to think about it, I said. He didn't like that. He was used to me saying yes. In the years before Vanessa came along, in the early years when he was just starting out, I had given him money without question. A down payment here, a car repair there. Emergency rent once when he was 26 and between jobs. The total, if I had added it up, would have been significant. I never added it up because I never thought of it as a ledger. He was my son. That's just what you do. But sitting there on the phone in February, I started adding it up for the first time. I'll call you in a few days, I said. In those few days, I drove out to see Fern. I'd been doing that since Thanksgiving. Not every week, but regularly. She lived in a farmhouse about 20 miles outside of town, the house she and her late husband had shared for 38 years. Her sons, Cecil and Ray, lived nearby. Her granddaughter, the girl with the book, was named Petra, and she was 9 going on 45. And she had recently decided that I was acceptable enough to sit beside at Sunday dinners. Fern had that kind of face that made you talk. I don't know how else to describe it. She didn't push. She didn't ask leading questions. She just listened in a way that made the thing you were carrying feel lighter, not because she fixed it, but because she held some of the weight with you for a minute. I told her about the call. She poured coffee, and we sat at her kitchen table, the one with the slightly uneven leg that she'd been meaning to fix for years, and she was quiet for a long time. What does your gut say? She asked. My gut says no. But your heart says yes. My heart says yes. My heart says he's my son. She nodded. She wasn't going to tell me what to do. I knew that. But the way she nodded told me something. I called Trent back and told him I couldn't do $15,000. I had some money set aside for emergencies and I didn't feel comfortable moving it. I said, if he needed a few hundred for groceries or something immediate, I could do that, but not $15,000. The silence on the other end of the phone was very cold. I thought you wanted to help me, he said. I do want to help you. Then help me. I can't give you $15,000. He hung up. He didn't say goodbye. He just hung up. He called again 6 weeks later. Different expense. Same number. This time it was Vanessa's car. He said the transmission had gone out and they needed $8,000 for a replacement. I asked why they didn't get a used car. He said Vanessa needed reliability for her commute. I said I understood, but I couldn't do $8,000. He said, "What about 5?" I said I couldn't do 5. He said, "Dad, I really need you right now." And I sat there holding the phone, listening to my son's voice, trying to remember when he had last called me just to talk, to ask how I was, to tell me something that happened in his day, something small and ordinary and not a transaction. I couldn't remember. "I love you," I told him, "but I can't keep being the person you call when you need money." He didn't hang up this time. He just said quietly and in a way that was meant to hurt, "You were never really there when I needed you anyway." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. Not because it wasn't true at all, but because it was partly true, and that was worse. I had missed things. I worked too much. The divorce was my fault in more ways than one. I had not been a perfect father, and I knew it. But I'd also not been a father who put his son last. I had just drawn, for the first time in my life, a line. I went to Fern's that Sunday. Petra was doing a puzzle at the kitchen table. Cecil was out back splitting wood, even though it was barely cold yet, because that's what Cecil does when he's got energy to burn. Ray was inside watching basketball. Nobody made a big deal about my being there. That was the thing about these people. They had just started including me, and then they kept including me, and nobody made speeches about it. Fern made her brisket. I peeled the potatoes because she'd taught me how she likes them peeled, which is very thin with a sharp knife, and she is particular about it, in a way that I find completely reasonable. Petra looked up from her puzzle at one point and said, "Hal, do you know the capital of Bhutan?" And I said I did not. She said, "I do," and went back to her puzzle. I felt something at that table that I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt settled. Trent didn't call for almost 4 months after our last conversation. I told myself that was okay. I told myself he was angry and he needed time. I believe both of those things were true. But underneath them was something sadder. I was also getting used to the silence. Not in a hardened way, in a grieving way, like accepting a reality instead of fighting it. My daughter called more than he did. I should say that. Her name is Addie, short for Adelaide, and she lives in Portland and works for an environmental nonprofit and calls me every Sunday without fail. Addie and Trent were never close. Different temperaments. She's warmer, slower to anger, more willing to say the hard thing without needing it to win. She knew about the money calls. She knew about Thanksgiving. "You know this isn't new," she told me once. "He's been doing this version of himself for a long time. He's still my son. He is. And you're still allowed to have boundaries." She'd met Fern by then. I told her about the Denny's, the pie, the farmhouse Sunday dinners. She listened to all of it with the particular attention she gives things she finds genuinely interesting, and then she said, "Hal, that's the best Thanksgiving story I've ever heard." Summer came and went. I helped Cecil replace some fencing on the back of Fern's property, which was more physical work than I'd done in years, and which my back made clear it remembered. Petra turned 10 and had a birthday party in the backyard. Most of the kids from her class who ran around with the anarchic energy of children who've had cake. I stayed to help clean up after. It didn't feel strange. It felt natural, the way things feel when you've stopped thinking about whether you belong somewhere and just started belonging. In September, Fern's older granddaughter came to visit. Her name was June. Addie told me this is a common name, and I didn't check the file. And she was 23 and in nursing school in Nashville. She had Fern's laugh. At dinner, she asked how I'd met the family, and Fern told the Denny's story, which had by now become a story, a set piece, something with timing and a punchline, and everyone laughed in the right places. June looked at me across the table and said, "That's so Grandma Fern." And I said, "That's what I figured when I met her." And that was the moment I knew I had been absorbed. Trent called again in October. This time his voice was different again. Not tired, not cold, something I recognized from when he was a teenager and had done something he needed to tell me about. A kind of braced quality. Dad, I wanted to let you know something. Vanessa and I are separating. I didn't say anything. She moved out in August. I've been. He stopped. Started again. Started again. I've been dealing with some things. Are you okay? I don't know. A long pause. I want to see you. We met for coffee. He drove up from Charlotte, and we sat in a diner. Not Denny's, a different place. And I looked at my son across the table and tried to find the 7-year-old who gave me the football drawing, and the teenager who needed to hear he was going to be okay, and the young man I'd watched drive away from home for the first time, and they were all there, underneath this tired 41-year-old man with new lines around his eyes. He apologized. Not fully and not completely, but genuinely. He said he'd known, for a while, that he'd been treating me like a resource instead of a person. He said Vanessa had encouraged a dynamic that he had gone along with because it was easier than examining it. He said the separation had cracked something open in him, and he was trying to look at it honestly. I told him I appreciated that. I meant it. I also told him that I had a life now, a good one, and that the people in it had taught me something about what it felt like to be chosen rather than defaulted to. I didn't say it to punish him. I said it because I needed him to know who I was now, not who I'd been. He asked about Fern. I'd mentioned her in passing before, but not fully. I told him about the farmhouse, the Sunday dinners, Cecil and Ray, Petra and her capitals of the world. She just invited you? A stranger? He said. She invited me to get pie. Then, she kept inviting me. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I didn't do that, did I? It wasn't a question. No, I said, but you can start. We didn't fix everything at that coffee. We haven't fixed everything. It doesn't work that way. And I've stopped expecting it to. What we have now is a rebuilding. Slow, honest, imperfect. He calls more than he used to. Not always for something, sometimes just to talk. The real moment. The one I keep coming back to. The one that closed something and opened something else at the same time happened in the spring. Addie got married. She'd been with her partner for 6 years, a woman named Sylvie who teaches high school literature, and who I love with the wholehearted certainty of someone who watched her choose my daughter every single day, without making a performance of it. They had a small ceremony outside Portland, about 40 people. Wildflowers and folding chairs, and a string quartet that played something I didn't recognize but that made Fern cry anyway. I walked Addie down the aisle, or what passed for an aisle, which was a path through a meadow that someone had mowed that morning, still smelling like cut grass. She held my arm, and we walked slowly, and she squeezed my arm twice, and I understood what the squeezes meant. Fern came. Cecil and Ray came. Petra came, wearing a dress that she had strong opinions about and which she abandoned before the reception was half over in favor of running around with the neighbor's dog. Addie had met Fern twice by then, and the two of them had the kind of natural ease that skips the getting-to-know-you phase entirely. Trent was there too. He came alone. He was quieter than usual, more careful. He shook hands with Cecil and talked to Ray for a while about something that made them both laugh. He sat at the table near me without being told to. The moment came after dinner, when people were moving around, finding the bar, finding the dance floor, finding the corners of the tent where you stand with a drink and watch everything. Trent found me standing at the edge of the tent, watching Petra try to teach Fern's son-in-law how to do something that might have been a dance move, or might have been a stretching exercise. He stood beside me. We watched. After a while, he said, "She really just invited you, out of nowhere." "Out of nowhere," I said. "And you just went with it?" I thought about it. About that Thanksgiving afternoon. The cold turkey, the filmed-over gravy. The sound of that table in the corner, The particular exhaustion of being 62 years old and entirely alone in a room full of people who weren't alone. I didn't have anywhere else to be, I said. Trent was quiet. I could feel him thinking. The careful, effortful thinking of someone who is trying to get something right. I'm sorry, he said. Not just for the money stuff. For all of it. For making you feel like there wasn't a place for you. I looked at my son. At the lines around his eyes and the way he was standing, slightly hunched, braced for my response. I know, I said. Is that enough? He asked. It's a start, I said. Come to Sunday dinner sometime. He looked at me. With them. With them. Petra ran past us at that moment, trailing a ribbon from somewhere, followed by the dog, followed by Fern calling Petra Marie, "Do not let that animal near the cake." And Trent watched this, and I watched him watch it, and something moved across his face that I hadn't seen there in years, something soft and a little surprised. Okay, he said. He came the following Sunday. He peeled potatoes while I told him about the thin knife and the particular way Fern likes it done. And she stood at the stove with her back to us and said nothing, but I could see her shoulders, and her shoulders were satisfied. Petra tested him on world capitals for 23 minutes. He got Reykjavik and Ulaanbaatar and lost points on Djibouti, which she let him know was very basic. After dinner, he helped Cecil carry chairs from the porch. I watched from the kitchen window. They were talking about something. I don't know what. It doesn't matter. I thought about what it costs to let someone in and what it costs not to. I thought about a table in a corner of a Denny's and a woman who got up and walked over to me without knowing anything about me, except that I was alone on Thanksgiving, and that was reason enough. I've thought a lot, in the years since, about why Fern did that. I asked her once, and she shrugged and said, there was room at the table, as if it were the simplest thing. As if the threshold for belonging were just, there is space, and you are here. I didn't know, sitting in that booth with filmed-over gravy, that I was 4 days away from the thing that would change my life. I didn't know that in 3 years I would be standing at my daughter's wedding watching a 9-year-old explain world capitals to my prodigal son. I didn't know that the family I was mourning that afternoon was not the only kind of family that existed. All I knew was that my turkey was cold. And then someone got up and walked across the room, and that was enough. I keep coming back to the kitchen table. Not the one in my apartment, but Fern's, the one with the uneven leg she never fixed. That table is where I started to understand something I should have known much earlier in my life, that the people who show up for you quietly, without drama and without keeping score, are telling you exactly who they are. And the people who only call when they need something are doing the same. Trent didn't become who he was by accident, and, honestly, neither did I. I worked too much when he was young. I was absent in the ways that feel minor at the time and turn out to be load-bearing. When the divorce happened, I handled my own pain so poorly that there wasn't much room for his. Kids notice that. They file it away somewhere they don't even know about, and it shapes the adults they become. So when I talk about what Trent did, the money calls, the Thanksgiving, the years of distance, I try to hold that full picture. 'Cause it doesn't erase consequence, but it does explain it. What changed things wasn't anger. It wasn't a confrontation. It was a decision, the quiet kind that happens inside you before it shows anywhere on the outside. I decided to stop making myself available for transactions and start being available for something real. Drawing that line with Trent cost me something. It was uncomfortable in the way that honest things usually are. But it was also the first genuinely clear-headed thing I'd done in our relationship in years, that kind of clarity. Knowing what you will and won't accept, and being able to hold to it without cruelty. That's something I had to grow into. It didn't come naturally. It took getting hurt enough times to understand that protecting yourself isn't the same as being cold. And then there's what Fern did. She sat down across from a stranger at Denny's and offered him pie and company. For no reason except that she had the room and the instinct. That's not a small thing. Most people don't do it. Most people look away. It takes a certain kind of person, someone who has lived long enough and paid enough attention to recognize that loneliness in a stranger and decide to do something about it instead of finishing their coffee and going home. That quality, the willingness to act on what you see even when nobody's asking you to, is the thing I most want to carry forward. Petra is 11 now. She corrects my geography without mercy, and I love her for it. Cecil splits wood when he has energy to burn. Ray still watches basketball with the focused intensity of someone who matters to the outcome. Trent is coming along, slowly and imperfectly, the way real things move. What I know is this. The life I have now didn't come from waiting to be chosen by the right people. It came from saying yes when someone sat down across from me and then showing up again the next Sunday and the one after that. Belonging isn't something that gets handed to you. It's something you build, one dinner at a time, one honest conversation at a time, one uneven kitchen table at a time. I didn't know any of that on Thanksgiving afternoon 3 years ago. I just knew my turkey was cold. Sometimes that's enough to start from.